This video is my personal testimony and is not meant to depict expert counsel or medical advice. This is a home video. Background noise and other minor disruptions may occur. This video series has been released as a call to those directly impacted by autism and those treating it, who feel in alignment with the revelation depicted herein. The purpose of the call is to gather a team of families and professionals who will join together to bring meaningful resources and real solutions to those diagnosed with regressive autism so that they can all walk out of trauma response patterns and into the freedom they deserve.
Hi, my name is Pamela Tidmore, and I'm here today as a mom of a child that was diagnosed with autism at the age of 2.5, which was almost 19 years ago. I want to share our personal story, as this is a story of revelation that came out of walking through this step by step as a parent and walking with my child. So after the medical community had diagnosed my son, and this was back in 1998, with autism, and when I inquired a little bit further, it was listed as organic brain dysfunction. And the reason that was because at the time, autism was classified as a mental illness, which insurance only covered 50% of that. So the doctors began to call it organic brain dysfunction so we could actually get services at that time. So my son was diagnosed, and he was placed on the autism spectrum as moderate to severe autism, as he had no receptive, no expressive, in extreme behavioral issues, really indicative of a lot of suffering, a lot of pain, and a lot of trauma. Now, in full disclosure, I did get 8 diagnoses just in case somebody was wrong, and I desperately needed them to be wrong, and they weren't. So then I was then faced with, now how do I solve this problem for my child? Because as any good parent, that's what we want to do. We want to solve the problem for our children. However, medicine, given where Miles was on the spectrum, offered me a less than 2% chance that he would have a normal life. So I really determined to utilize my own intellect to solve the problem. But I had met my match with autism, and watching my son suffer day after day just wasn't an option for me. So I turned to religion, and I dragged my son to every healing service that I could find. In close proximity to my house, I actually wrote out scriptures and stood on them, literally standing on them, and to no avail. So I turned to the living God that was right here within me, that had been calling to me to search within the heart of God for the answers that I was seeking. So I did turn there in an effort to help me understand what had happened to my son. And what happened is I met a living God and began a journey of my own inner healing, which eventually led to being guided and directed by God to the following revelations about autism that I'm about to reveal. So I want to make a statement here that the revelations that are coming forth came through me. So they had to come through an imperfect vessel. I don't have degrees, don't have anything but experience with walking with God through a very dark place with my son. So I want to share with you today what was revealed to me as the truth of what causes autism, and can give us a starting point of how we begin to help these children and their families out of where they are. The efforts that I want to put out here are that we could come together and bring resources and resolutions, real resolutions to those impacted by autism. So this is our journey. I'm here to share with you the revelations that have come out of what I would say was a very dark place, and it's my hope that this will shed light and bring truth to one of the greatest modern medical mysteries of our time. So let's begin with what autism means. It literally means absorbed in self. Some dictionaries say morbid self-absorption. I think that's the origin of the word. And it's associated with impaired communication, emotional detachment, and excessive rigidity in the body. So the mystery has always been what caused the child to go so deep within themselves to isolate and protect themselves from the world around them. Want to also show here a parallel between abused children and children with autism, and it's not something that you can deny. Children who have been emotionally abused, physically abused, sexually abused present with the same types of behaviors that we see in autism, in the sense that there's fear, dissociation, fragmentation, but no one has been able to ever pinpoint why children with autism present that way. So what I'm asking you to do is consider that they were traumatized biologically through a condition called trigeminal neuralgia that fragmented not only their communication system but their souls and drove them into this place of captivity, locked deep within themselves. And I will explain all that in a few minutes, but I propose that autism is a very intricate, tangled, complicated defense system created by an infant, unable to communicate, to survive severe biological pain and trauma caused by a condition called trigeminal neuralgia. Now, their defense systems are comprised of many isolated as well as interrelated parts. It's very hard to understand because it was created by an underdeveloped, immature mind of an infant child, which is why they've remained trapped inside of themselves. So knowing where they are opens the door in the way of understanding how to help them out of being trapped within themselves and restore them back to safety and security, the safety and security of their own bodies. And that's what trauma does. Trauma causes us to not even trust our own bodies as a safe place. So given that, I'm going to take you on a journey to give you an A to Z look as to how this happened. So Miles loved Legos, and so I created a Lego tower to show you where they started and how they ended up with a diagnosis of autism. So I'm going to walk you step by step through this process to gain an understanding of how they got there. So I want to begin with the typically developing child, which is here, which Miles was. He met all of his milestones. He rolled over, he sat up, he cooed, babbled, laughed, crawled, pulled up. He had interactive gestures. He was imitating exclamations. He was beginning to imitate words and short phrases. And I had Miles at the age of 37, so this was just my joy to get to just experience this with my only child. And I just saw a vibrant, loving child that was connected to himself, connected to others, and connected to the world around him. This journey was revealed to me over a period of several years, and God would give me words and then unpack those words for me. I had 5 specific words, and I'll share that whole testimony maybe in another video. But what happens next is there has to be biological risk factors that have to line up in order to create a perfect environment for this trigeminal neuralgia to manifest. And so that's what I want to share with you. Numbers currently, I believe, are 1 in 54 children diagnosed with autism and 1 in 34 boys, I believe. I'm not positive on those statistics, but it's close. So why 1 in 54 or 1 in 34? So some considerations that I want to put out there are these risk factors that are very real and very much something that is a part of our world system today, so the world that we live in. So one consideration I want to look at is a compromised immune system. So children with a compromised immune system are at risk. What can constitute a compromised immune system? Several things: traumatic pregnancy, traumatic birth, early childhood trauma, in utero stresses, long, difficult labor, of which Miles and I had. We had a 37-hour labor, birth complications, NICU, biological, any type of biological effects on an infant or a toddler having and pertaining to do with trauma. We also look at a compromised immune system can be in potentially a genetic predisposition. Currently, the last article I read, there were 102 genes associated with autism. Another factor to look at for a compromised immune system is teething. And this is a hot topic for some reason. I don't understand that. Talk to any parent whose child is experiencing pain, excessive drooling, low-grade fever, bowel disruption because of all of the drool, and it does require an immune response. And so that can be a factor that we should look at. Once again, I'm not looking to argue with anybody. I'm just a mother, a mom. I don't have a PhD to strip or anything to come after except for my own experiences. We also have to look at infant vaccination schedules. And once again, this is a very sensitive subject, but it's something we need to consider when we're looking at risk factors. When we're sitting down and we're saying we have certain biological risk factors that we should look at to protect our children. Now, we could vaccinate responsibly and maybe spread that schedule out a little bit. I'm just saying we have to talk about this. So let's look at the vulnerability of a developing neurological system, and then let's add a compromised immune system on top of that. And even I found an article actually on the National Institute of Health recently. I'm not sure of the post date. This was actually June the 19th, 2015, but it was an article from PubMed Central that talked about infant immunity. And I'm going to read you what it says. Key factors known to influence early infant immunity and responses to vaccines are type of vaccine. This is an article, and I will have it. This is actually just the visual of that, but I'll have a link to the article at the bottom of the video. But types of vaccines, timing of vaccinations, location. Interesting, it said microbiome, which is really gut health, which in a traumatized child, you have got some considerations that you need to look at there. Co-infections, maternal factors, host genetics, pattern recognition receptors. So let's look at this right here that is actually saying we have to take a look at these influencers if we're to stop this carnage of children facing autism. So perfect biological storm occurs through these risk factors. Compromised immune systems. Now we want to take another look at what has to also align here is a viral attack. Now, the viral attack that was identified to me by God was herpes. Herpes, interesting virus. There are 8 strains currently of herpes. Herpes, by the way, actually means serpent or creeper. So it's a virus that once it's in the system, they say it cannot be removed, and it actually goes dormant into the ganglia or the nerve centers of the trigeminal nerve and the dorsal root, both having sensory functions. So let's look at the strains of herpes. Simplex 1, which is fever blisters, and I do believe Simplex 1 plays a factor here, either genetically and or potentially dormant within the child's ganglia of the trigeminal nerve. Simplex 2, which does not play a factor here, I don't believe. Varicella herpes zoster, which is chickenpox, and I think that is a huge one that we need to take a look at here. Varicella herpes zoster is something that we inject through the chickenpox vaccine, so it's something we really do need to to consider here. Epstein-Barr, which is mononucleosis. There is another one, but it does affect gastrointestinal tract, so it and I can't pronounce it. I'm not going to try to. Roseola, which is one that we really need to consider, simply because that is something that almost every child comes in contact with. It's a very contagious, and it affects them 6 to 8 months with a fever and then a rash that presents itself afterwards. And then there's another one, which is a sarcoma. So herpes is something we need to stop and take a look at. What was revealed to me was herpes lesions form internally along the trigeminal nerve, which is the 5th cranial nerve. That nerve is responsible for the governance of the sensory system for eyes, ears, mouth, mandible area, and part of the sinuses. So the combination of the herpes virus lying dormant in the trigeminal ganglia and other risk factors create an active environment for herpes lesions to form along the 5th cranial nerve. I do want to address right here the immune system, why we have such a variant between boys and girls. And I do believe because the immune systems of girls is somewhat stronger than the immune systems of boys. And that's simply the way God made us, and probably because women carry children and it requires a stronger defense system, immunity-wise, in order to do that. No superiority here, just stating fact. So let's go here now. We're going on to the onset of trigeminal neuralgia. So we have active lesions that are creating a temporary condition, and I think it's very important to say temporary condition of trigeminal neuralgia. It's a neuropathic disorder characterized by episodes of intense, excruciating pain along the trigeminal nerve. Now, I've never experienced trigeminal neuralgia, but I have had a friend that did. She had been in a couple car accidents and had a compression of that nerve, and she explained it as something that she could not get away from. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't run from it because it was happening within her. And she had to go so far inside of herself to stop the pain that she dissociated completely from the pain just to survive episodes. Now, let's consider that in an infant that has no language and cannot tell you what's happening. So the trigeminal nerve is comprised of the following 3 branches: the ophthalmic nerve, which is the sensory pathway to the eyes and to the nose; the maxillary nerve, which is the sensory pathways of the eyes, the cheek, upper lip, teeth, gums, and nose; and the mandibular nerve, which is the sensory pathway of the lower lip, teeth, gums, chin, jaw, ear, and motor functions of the mouth, motor functions of mastication, as well as motor functions of the lingual nerve, which is the language nerve. So trigeminal neuralgia has been described as among, as I was sharing about my friend, the most painful conditions known to man. It has often been referred to as the suicide disease due to an internal pain that one cannot escape from. Once again, I want to state this, that the symptoms are temporary. So this all these risk factors come into play, and this biological storm occurs, and this is active for a period of time. How long that is, I don't know. But what I do know is that the intensity of the pain and the frequency and duration of the active lesions determine how severe the trauma seats in the child and where the child ends up on the spectrum. So the only thing that we can know, because an infant cannot express what's going on, is we have to look at behavioral issues and what's happening behaviorally. Now, I know for Miles, I could see these episodes, active episodes. In hindsight, is 2020, because I didn't know in what was happening in the moment was just incredible pain on his part, and fear and dissociation, and incredible fear and absolute devastation watching that unfold and not being able to help that. But let's go back to trigeminal neuralgia and what can cause an attack. Any mild stimulation, when the lesions are active, anything can cause an attack. Hair just literally brushing up against your cheek, brushing your teeth, a barometric pressure change in the room. If I'm in the room, somebody opens the door and the barometric pressure changes, I can experience an attack. The wind. Now, what adds to this is, let's say I'm playing with this toy. It's not a toy, it's my Burt's Bees. But if I was playing with this toy when an attack occurred, say the wind hit or something brushed up against my face, then this actually becomes my trigger point for pain. The body retains the trauma in somatic memory, and so I can be looking at this and trigger another attack similar to PTSD. So the trigger points are equally as important to isolate and get a grasp on of what's triggering the child, because after this has subsided, the trauma has remained. So the child's communication system has been disrupted at this point. If we're looking at all of this trauma to the sensory system of the eyes, the ears, the mouth, then they've really lost their ability to be able to maintain order in thought. They also become hypersensitive. So everything is thrown into somewhat of a chaos, and they've lost their ability to effectively receive information and or transmit information coming in or going out through the sensory system of the eyes, the ears, the mouth, and the nose. So you can see the setup here for a child to be locked within themselves with no way out. Now, God always confirms what he's doing, and I had no grid for any of this as it was unfolding before me. I was looking in totally different areas of what would cause autism. But as God began to unlock these words for me and show me what was happening with the trigeminal nerve, as I began to study the trigeminal nerve, I saw that it was primarily found to occur in the elderly, not in children. And so I began to just question if I was actually hearing God correctly or if this was where he was headed with this. Came upon an article that was published in 2004 by the Arizona, hold on, I'll get that for us, by the Arizona Star. And it was a story about a little girl's, it's titled, a young girl's painful problem took more than a year to diagnose. And I'll have a link to this article, hopefully it's still up, so that you can read it for yourself. But this little girl started grabbing her cheek and screaming and crying, and through the course of, I don't know how long, a couple weeks, maybe about a month, she began to lose her language. Now, she was 3 years old. She began to lose language. She lost her ability, or her will to even live, and she retreated totally into herself. Now, it took her and her family a year to have this diagnosed. They took it to doctor after doctor after doctor, and finally they were led to a dentist that was able to identify it as trigeminal neuralgia. They began to treat her, and she came out of it. She's living a beautiful, fully functional life to this day. So this was a confirmation for me. Now, I believe that Emily's, that's the little girl's name, her journey was a little bit different in what potentially caused her trigeminal neuralgia, but what it did was created a parallel for me. Now, I don't know that I mentioned this earlier, so I'm going to mention it again, that I began to see huge parallels with children that were diagnosed with autism and children that were traumatized, either physically, mentally, or sexually abused. So this condition that's coming forth is the missing link as to what causes autism and gives us an opportunity to be able to help these children come out of that place. So back to this right here. When we look at Emily's story, this perfect 3-year-old begins experiencing trigeminal neuralgia and regress to drooling, not talking, not sleeping, lethargic from pain, and afraid to do anything because everything, even walking, would jostle that pain awake. We see what could potentially be happening with children diagnosed on the spectrum. This takes us to the next section, which is going to talk about the autonomic nervous system dysfunction. So that is what we have to talk about. Severe trauma has occurred, and while the lesions have subsided, the trauma remains, and a new normal of dysfunction has been created by the child to function through life. They've had to create their defense systems and or coping strategies just to survive. So we now have a child who has autonomic nervous system that has a limbic system dominance, which is a heightened sensory system, which to explain that is that you're always on high alert, always looking for the next attack, always looking for that pain to present itself. So you are somewhat disconnected from this realm here, and you're constantly looking for something to happen. And an example for that is if I hear gunshots outside, I'm looking for a way to survive that. I'm not that concerned with things that are happening right in front of me. So this is what a sympathetic dominance looks like. It's a heightened alert status. And it also, the autonomic nervous system now has gone into sympathetic dominance and parasympathetic freeze. And that just means that it almost gives a flattened effect. It's like you've heard people say, it looks like, the lights are on, but nobody's home. And essentially they have gone so far inside of themselves and are in that sympathetic dominant state. So safety and security have been lost due to the helplessness of the infant to give voice to the source of the pain and the lack of the parental caregiver ability to reconcile the pain. So now you have a child who does not feel safe, and they don't feel safe even in their own bodies, let alone with their parents or in their own home. And it's just such a sad reality. I know for me, as this was unfolding, I just physically even got sick at understanding what had happened to my child. But thankfully, there's a way out, and we'll get to that. So we have fragmentation and dissociation that's created to survive the excruciating pain. And in trauma, the pain becomes unbearable so that the events are removed from the frontal cortex, walled off, and moved to the back of the brain, awaiting reconnection and wholeness. And given that this fragmentation, dissociation occurred so young, we're looking at multiple fractures and multiple dissociations. Giving you hope, though, always a way out. Okay, so now we have these defense systems that have been created and formed, so the child has learned how to self-protect, sadly, as an infant. And in the absence of feeling safe, the child has to create ways to protect themselves. And that's what I just talked about, coping strategies, defense systems. We have fight and flight, rage and terror, where aggression's created as a defense system. I know that Miles had very aggressive tendencies, but it was the behavior that was trying to communicate to me the pain that was behind that. Although I didn't see it as that, I was trying to manage aggression. So fight or flight, rage or terror, we realize in terror that fear is something that becomes a stronghold. And a defense system to self-protect, meaning they're afraid to do everything and anything just simply because it could cause another attack. And something we have to understand here is that this happens in infancy. It's before there is prefrontal cortex memory, so these children don't even know why they're afraid. They don't know why they're aggressive. They have absolutely no idea. They're just in survival mode. So modifying behavior isn't going to solve the problem. What's going to solve the problem is getting to the heart of the child and restoring that child back to safety and security. So we have autonomic nervous system dysfunction, sympathetic dominance, parasympathetic freeze. I spoke about those two. That sympathetic dominance is the amygdala, the limbic system, now is the primary neurological governor. And the sensory system's locked on alert and survival, which creates hypervigilance. And the parasympathetic freeze state is just frozen in fear, and this creates the illusion that the children are of a lower cognitive functioning, which they are not, and it creates that flattened personality effect, internally self-absorbed, and their lack of ability to connect to themselves or to others socially. So we get on to the next phase, which is severe biological dysfunction that has occurred. And here we have a body now that is in a trauma state, that is incapable of normal bodily functioning. So once again, we go back to stress. We have a circulatory system that is now on lockdown, a digestive system on lockdown, a endocrine system on lockdown, a respiratory system on lockdown, and need I go further? All systems are on lockdown in survival mode. So all bodily systems now are governed by an unbalanced autonomic nervous system, causing stressors in all the bodily systems. So now we're in this severe biological state, and we have to look at the digestive system and stress and how this pertains to a child that's trying to heal. So a digestive system in stress is unable to break down hard to digest proteins, which are caseins, which is milk and dairy, and glutens, which are wheat, breads. Also, very difficult to break down fats and refined sugars. So a lot of people are talking about the diet, and the diet is something, it's an act of mercy for a child who is already dealing with all of this. When we add this on top of it, let me explain to you what can happen with undigested proteins or improperly digested proteins. So what can occur as an opiate effect when gluten, I think it's called exorphins, which are wheat, and casomorphins, which are dairy, and soy morphins, which come from soybeans, are consumed by a body in an extreme stress state. The inability to properly digest the proteins creates a gut permeability that allows the opiate peptides to cross the gut-brain barrier, affecting the central nervous system and the gastrointestinal system. So it has somewhat of a morphine-like effect on the child, which leads to psychotic behavior. So I've once again have lived this, and I have seen my son almost crave like an addict, strong sugar. Sugar and refined carbs, just trying to get back on top. When we add on to that a fat malabsorption issue, which can create, so here we've got psychotic behavior being created by glutens, caseins, sugars that can't digest properly, and fats that can't digest properly. So we add on to that fatigue and weakness and diarrhea and gas and bloating. Yeast overgrowth, which occurs once again causing fatigue, mental confusion, constipation, diarrhea, fungal infections. Yeast can cause a lack of ability to focus, ADHD, ADD, an increase in seasonal allergies, urinary infections, mood swings. It just goes on and on and on and on and on. So what we have to find is we have to find a way to help these families provide this very important component. The diet doesn't solve the problem, but the diet will give the body the chance to heal. So we have to put in gluten, casein, sugar-free diets and help these people. It's extremely expensive, and it's a lot of work, especially for a family that's already struggling. just to survive. So this is another component that I hope that we can bring to the healing process. And I do want to make this statement. I perceive that if we can gather a group of people to come together and really create a treatment modality for recovery, that we're looking at recovery within potentially a year. And I think the younger the child, the easier the recovery. The older the child, of course, there's going to be more defense systems that have been ingrained that need to be deconstructed. So I just want to give hope to people that when we know the cause, then we can look at the way to restore them back to safety and security. And I do believe that there is a team out there that God can assemble of the best that can put a very effective treatment model, which I believe can either be paid for through insurance companies or come through a government program. So I just wanted to put a little encouragement in there as this continues to unfold before us. So not only do we have these digestive issues, malabsorption issues, and the yeast overgrowth, we also have a disruption of normal detoxifying of the body, and the child's body becomes toxic. So a normal body will detoxify the blood through a functioning liver that eliminates daily toxins through the kidneys, the intestines, the lungs, and the lymphatic system, and even the skin. But when normal detoxification's been halted in their little bodies that are locked in their trauma state due to the overall constriction of the body, all bodily systems are affected. So the liver can't detoxify the blood. The kidneys, the intestines, the lungs are equally impaired due to the restriction of blood flow to the organs. So the child's body becomes toxic. What does toxicity look like in a body? We have altered mental state, confusion, headaches, adrenal fatigue. And adrenal fatigue can go both ways. It can look like lethargy, but it can also look like an abundance of energy. Also paleness of the skin because of the constriction, and muscle and joint weakness. And I have seen all of that in my son, not ever understanding how to help him. So now that we have put all of that in place, the final piece, or one of the final pieces, is what God revealed to me. And this was, interestingly enough, the first word that he gave me, which was maturation. And he revealed a maturational disruption from the life stage of infancy to toddlerhood, and that it had become severely disrupted. So we have a child experiencing all of this in infancy, growing into toddlerhood, and this whole maturational life stage is severed. And so I wanted to explain what's happening there. The communication system of the child has been shattered, and that allows them not to connect, nor allows them to explain what's going on in their inner realm. And then the loss of the following developmental functions that were stolen from them. So during that life stage, children going from infancy to toddlerhood begin the journey from separating from their parents and coming into their own. It was brought to my attention that infants think they're still part of their parents. But at this stage, they're beginning to come into their own. But what's happened to our little ones that have been experiencing this, they've lost their ability to feel safe in their own bodies. Also, what happens is the ability to trust and attach to people. So they've lost that. The development of trust is gone. Why? Nobody could help them in their pain and in their excruciating place of pain and trauma. Mom and dad didn't know what was happening. Doctors didn't know what was happening. So that child was left to fend for itself. So trust is cut off. Hope, cut off. Social attachment, cut off. The maturation of the sensory and their perceptual functions halted. Language halted. Confidence stopped. And their ability to connect to themselves and to others has ceased. So we're looking at what I consider and what I feel like God revealed to me is what we call autism. And autism is a child that is locked in a cycle of trauma. So, once again, I want to go back to where I started. Autism means absorbed in self, it's associated with impaired communication, which we can see through the trigeminal nerve, eyes, ears, mouth. Emotional detachment, we can see through the having to disconnect, dissociate, or fragment away from the pain. Um, and emotional detachment. And of course, excessive rigidity, which shows you the toxicity, the pain, the digestive dysfunction, all of this. This is autism. So the mystery has always been what caused the child to go so deep within themselves, to isolate, to protect themselves from the world around them. And I declare that mystery solved to the best of my ability. I believe with everything in me that the excruciating pain of a condition called trigeminal neuralgia that fragmented not only their communication system, but fractured, fragmented, and potentially dissociated their souls. So I propose that autism is a very intricate, very tangled, complicated defense system created by an infant who's been unable to communicate. And they created that defense system to survive severe biological pain and trauma caused by trigeminal neuralgia on the trigeminal nerve. So their defense systems are comprised of many isolated as well as interrelated parts. Very difficult to understand because it was created by a little baby with an underdeveloped, immature mind, which is why they've remained trapped inside of themselves. So knowing where they are opens the door in the way of understanding how to help them out of being trapped within themselves and restore them back to safety and security. Currently, my son and I are on that journey out, and we've walked a very long path out, and I do believe that there are people that cut the way through the woods so other people can get through faster. I do believe, as I stated earlier, that recovery is possible for every child, young and old, if we will come together and create a think tank and a task force. I do believe it should be headed by parents, or at least parents being the largest part of that, because we live that. There have been billions of dollars put into autism research, into all different things that never came to my front door, never helped me in the darkest of darkest places. And as a single parent raising her child for the last 10 years by myself, I think it's time that we work together and bring a program that has the potential to walk every single child out of this trauma. So I appreciate you taking the time to listen, and there are contact information at the bottom if you feel as though you might be one of those that will be joining this team to begin to solve this problem in a very real way for millions of people. So thank you so much for listening, and blessings to you, and we will meet again. Thank you.